Hello YouTubers, Ram55 here with my next installment of Kerbal Space Program NASA missions. I'm going to show you my version of NASA's Mariner 2 spacecraft, launched on August 29, 1962 from Cape Canaveral at 2:53 a.m. Now Mariner 2 provided NASA with their first. It was the world's first interplanetary vehicle. Mariner 2 passed within 21,600 miles, or 34,760 kilometers of the planet Venus on December 14, 1962. After 107 days of traveling through interplanetary space, it scanned the planet's surface for only 42 minutes, but sent back valuable data to scientists back on Earth. Now let's flash back to 1962. The United States and the Soviet Union are locked in a Cold War. The space race was a product of that competition for world domination. And let's not forget that on October 14th through the 28th of 1962, the world held its breath as these two superpowers stared each other down during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I can vividly remember laying on the floor and listening to the radio as President Kennedy addressed the nation about the seriousness of the events that were happening down in Cuba. And even at that young age, I was actually in fear that the end of the world was near. And I remember distinctly people were building bomb shelters, and we were practicing that duck and roll thing back in school as a result of that tension generated by the Cold War, and it culminated in the crisis that became the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, on a happier note, the Beatles had not yet reached American soil and were interestingly turned down by Decca Records, but released their first single, Love Me Do. They also released their first number one hit, Please Please Me, in 1962. Now, the average U.S. home back in 1962 cost $12,500, and the average U.S. income was $5,500. What a change. And get this, tuition at Harvard University was a whopping $1,500. I don't think that would even cover books nowadays. A gallon of gas cost about 28 cents. And Spider-Man made his comic book debut for Marvel Comics. On TV, Johnny Carson replaced Jack Paar on The Tonight Show. And a small contingent of U.S. advisors established theirself a presence in the little southeast country called Vietnam. We all know where that led. Now, previously, NASA had launched manned spacecraft, and we had 4 successful launches. 2 of them were suborbital, 2 of them were orbital. And earlier in the year, Ranger 4 was designed to transmit pictures of the lunar surface and was launched on April 23rd of 1962. It was designed to transmit pictures of the lunar surface before crashing into the moon, and also deposit a seismometer on the moon, also measure the reflectivity of the lunar surface. However, an onboard computer failed, preventing the deployment of solar panels and the navigation system, and as a result, Ranger 4 impacted the far side of the moon without sending back any data. Now, Mariner 1, the predecessor to today's flight, was launched on July 22, 1962, and was also designed to fly to the planet Venus. But shortly after takeoff, the rocket was behaving erratically to guidance instructions. A range officer initiated a self-destruct command, as it was feared that the spacecraft may be headed toward shipping lanes or inhabited areas. Now, some accounts say that he was a little overzealous in making that decision, but regardless, the spacecraft was destroyed shortly after takeoff. But 5 weeks later, Mariner 2 was launched. Now, as I said, Mariner 2 was the world's first interplanetary spacecraft, and it was launched successfully on August 27, 1962 from Cape Canaveral. Now, this one, too, just after liftoff, began an uncommanded roll, and it actually got up to a rate of about 1 roll per second. Now, as it rolled, the antenna was turning away from ground stations, and it was unable to respond to guidance signals. There was great concern that they would have to destroy this one too, but miraculously, After about 1 minute, the problem fixed itself and the rocket stabilized and was able to continue on its way. There were several other glitches along its flight to Venus, but all of these also miraculously fixed itself, and the mission went off without too much of a problem. Now, by October, Mariner had made its first discovery, and that was the existence of solar wind. This is the stream of solar plasma that was constant throughout the Mariner 2 flight. Now, along the way, Mariner 2 spacecraft temperature began to increase, and there was grave concern that the vehicle might fry itself before it got to Venus. But in spite of several problems, the solar panel not working, the spacecraft being within a few degrees of cooking itself before the flyby, it went off without too much of a hitch and was a great success, passing about 21,500 miles from Venus. And that occurred on December 27th as it made its closest approach. And at that point, it was some 65.6 million miles away from its home planet. Pretty remarkable. 7 days later, on January 3rd, 1963, it fell forever silent, and it remains to this day in orbit around the Sun. Now, as I said, Mariner 2 was a great success, and it discovered the solar winds. It found that the planet Venus has no magnetic fields, and you got to remember that the magnetic fields is what protects the planet Earth from cosmic rays from the Sun. Also, on its 65.6 million mile journey, it only picked up one fleck of dust. At that time, there was concern that there were microparticles and micrometeorites out there that would pose a danger to spacecraft and astronauts, but this kind of allayed those fears. It also found that cosmic and high energy radiation was actually at a safe level for astronaut traveling out in interplanetary space. There was a lot of debate about the temperature of the planet Venus, and this spacecraft actually found the surface to be 300 to 400 degrees Fahrenheit, much warmer than some had predicted. And it kind of confirmed the presence of the greenhouse effect. Some people thought that that high temperature being reflected from Venus was the reflection of heat from the outer atmosphere, but this probe actually found that it was the surface temperature of the planet. So not only was this surface scorching, but it was also extremely dense, as it was found to be some 20 times the atmospheric density of that back on Earth. Now, Mariner 2 also found the mass of Venus and calculated it quite accurately by measuring the radio wave changes, or the Doppler effect, as Mariner accelerated in the gravitational field of Venus. It also resulted in a new value for the astronomical unit, which is the average distance between the Earth and the Sun, which is just under 93 million miles. Now, later spacecraft actually found that the surface of Venus was actually up closer to 900 degrees Fahrenheit, and that the atmosphere was 90 times more dense than that of Earth. So not only was it scorchingly hot, but it was extremely dense and oppressive. Not a place you want to take your summer vacation. All in all, though, Mariner 2 was a giant success and a feather in the cap for JPL and NASA. And for once, they had been the first to be first in the space race. So let's get on with our flight. So here's my version of the Mariner 2 spacecraft. Up on the very top here, we have the probe itself that's going to make the journey out to Eve, which is the equivalent of Venus in the Kerbal Space Program. And down below, the giant rocket that's going to propel it along its way. So let's take a close-up look at all the parts and pieces that we have on it. It has the general shape of the Mariner spacecraft, which is what I generally try to achieve when I design my vehicles. At the very top, small nose cone, but below that, 2 octagonal struts and a modular girder assembly or adapter. I have several of these cubic octagonal struts to get the antenna out away from the body of the probe itself. As this opens up, I wanted to have some room. And then there's two OX4L 1x6 photovoltaic panels on either side, and all these are attached to the heart of this vehicle, which is the protobotodyne HECS, or however you say that. Now, because this is a, you can tell it's an asymmetric vehicle, I was worried about aerodynamic drag and weight on that side causing the vehicle to be unstable, and to get around that a little bit, I was trying to put some things on the opposite side that would add some weight and give a little bit more stability. So I put two hot thermometers. I put a Gravimax negative gravioli detector, a Presmat barometer, and a double C seismic accelerometer. So that's the probe itself. Below that we have a TR2C stack separator to separate the probe up here from the Oscar B fuel tank and the LV1 Ant liquid fuel engine. This is going to be the unit that actually does the fine tuning as it approaches Eve. Below that we have a TR2V stack decoupler, a FLA10 adapter, an RC001S remote guidance unit so that I can control this part once it's out into space. Don't know if that's going to be necessary or not, but it's also got the advanced inline stabilizer. It's got 4 Oxstat photovoltaic panels that will give solar power to keep these batteries, the Z100 chargeable battery packs, charged up and ready to go. It has an FLT400 fuel tank. Inside here we have the LV909 Terrier liquid fueled engine. There it is. We have the TR18A stack decoupler and another FLT800 fuel tank, and down here we have the LVT45 in the other stage that will get us out into orbit and perhaps start us on our journey toward Eve. Below that engine we have another FL800 fuel tanks, 4 basic fins to give us some stability, as well as 4 24-77 Twitch liquid fueled engines, as well as the main thruster, which is the LVT30 Reliant liquid fueled engine to get us off the launch pad. So that's my rocket and the equivalent of the Mariner 2 probe that will take us out to a flyby of Eve. So let's get it out to the launch pad. Now I've set up an alarm clock so that when we are in the window of Kerbin to Eve, which is 37 days, 5 hours, and 33 minutes from now, it will stop about 6 hours or 1 Kerbal day prior to launch. So I'm just going to fast forward to that time. So we'll be 6 hours prior to the launch, and then we'll go from there. Okay, we've got 5 hours and 36 minutes until we get to our actual window to go to Eve. But let's get us up in a parking orbit, and we can make a couple orbits around Kerbin while we wait for that time to go away. So we are ready for launch, and we're just going to go up to a parking orbit of about 100,000 feet. We'll start our gravity turn. Let it settle right about there because it's going to continue to fall over on its own. And we're waiting for the apoapsis height, this number up here, to get to 100,000. Once we do that, we'll go establish ourselves with a maneuver node that will put us into a parking orbit. Start to throttle down here so I get better control, and we're waiting for that apoapsis height to reach 100. So now let's go out to the map mode. We'll add a maneuver. And right about there, they should be fairly equal. They're not, so we'll adjust this that way. 108 by 89. (102 by 96). That'll be close enough. So now that we've established a maneuver node, let's align ourselves with that burn node. And we'll go back to our spacecraft view. And that's us waiting to make the burn. It's going to be a 42-second burn. We reached the node in 1 minute and 12 seconds. But we're going to run out of fuel before we establish ourselves in orbit. So divide that in two, 21 seconds. Let's make it 35 seconds before our burn, because the motor, once we drop this booster off, the motor here is less powerful, so it'll be a longer burn time to get us into orbit. So when we get down to 35, we'll launch. We'll run out of fuel. This booster will fall back to planet Kerbin, and then this one will take us on our way to Jewel, or on to Eve. So we'll have to stage here in a moment. And now this motor is not quite as powerful, so we've got a little bit longer of a burn to make to get us into that parking orbit. We'll fine-tune this once we're done with this burn here. Okay, let's see where we are in our orbit. We'll get rid of the node. This says 99, that says 73. So we have to go a little bit more to get ourselves in where we want to be. So we'll just kind of burn nice and slow till that gets up to about 100, or equal to this one. That looks pretty darn good to me. So 99 by 98, that's pretty close to 100. We've got 5 hours before we reach our projected window for the departure to Eve. So let's just accelerate time. Okay, we've accelerated time a little bit. We're now 2 hours and 4 minutes away from our anticipated time to burn. But let's get our spacecraft all set up here. So the first thing we want to do is extend our solar panels so that we'll have power. And we also want to put our antenna out as well so that we can beam all that data back to Kerbin. So that's been done. Now let's go out and establish our maneuver node. So we want to burn as the sun is rising. So we want to burn somewhere right in here. So we're going to add a maneuver node. And we're going to pull it out this way so we can see the orbit of Kerbin. And we're just going to put this in here and pull on it and see where that vector takes us. Now you can see the vector is a little bit not quite lined up with the planet, so we'll drag that around until it's just about there, which looks pretty good to me. So here's our spacecraft orbit, and we want it to come down and intersect with that purple ring, which is going to be our target. That ain't right. Let's put this back over here. That looks pretty good. So that will drop us down into the presence of Eve, and let's see if we get an encounter or a close approach. Nothing yet. Oh, there was something. Briefly. Right there, we have an encounter with Eve. We actually have a periapse, so let's go with that. So that burn is in 55 minutes. Let's go ahead and align ourselves with that node. Accelerate time until we get within a couple minutes of that burn time. 6 minutes to the burn. And we are now 2 minutes away from that burn, so let's align ourselves with that maneuver node perfectly. 55 seconds, so we'll do about 30 seconds on either side. So there's our Mariner spacecraft in all of its glory with its solar panels out and its high gain antenna to beam information back to Kerbin as we're making our interplanetary journey. There's Moon. Let's go to Eve. Let's go back out to the map mode and see what that gets us. Let's just fine tune this a little bit. Okay. That will work for now. We will adjust our trajectory once we get on our way, but that'll be our next video. But for now, let's just kind of watch us leaving the planet. Boy, look at that rocket still glowing red hot after that burn. So let's speed up time as we drift away from our mother planet. We'll say goodbye to the planet Kerbin, never to be seen again by this spacecraft. There's Moon on the other side. Where's Minmus? Usually it shows up as a speck of flickering light. I did not see it. But let's enjoy the view as Mariner 2 leaves Kerbin. So with that, we're on our way. We will see you guys with our next video. Hope you enjoyed this. This is the launch of the Mariner 2. And we'll talk to you guys soon.